25-year-old kindergarten teacher Simone Strobel, last seen leaving a Lismore pub with her boyfriend and his sister in 2005.
She was murdered and her body was found about a week later.
Why should I kill my girlfriend?
It was zeroing in on Toby and his sister as having had some involvement prior to her being found as a murder victim. You've been named as a person of interest in Australia. Why won't you give evidence? Why won't you appear at the inquest into the murder of your girlfriend?
Simone Strobel, she's a young backpacker. She arrives in Lismore with a few friends. What happens next?
Look, a very sad case. I think she and her boyfriend Toby and two friends, including his sister Katrin, were travelling the East Coast like all other backpackers. They end up at Lismore with their Convi van at the local caravan park there. And locals would say, like any other backpacker passing through, lots of fun, visit the local pubs, etc., and back to the caravan park at night.
And then Simone disappears, right?
She disappears overnight, and some of the locals at the caravan park would later report that they heard an argument between a male person, a man and a woman, which they believe was her, who was coming from that vicinity of the park. But for all intents and purposes, she just vanishes. She storms off and leaves the trio, including her boyfriend Toby, and is never seen again. Now, the next day, Toby, goes and reports her missing to the police. Strangely, after they pack up the camp and look to move on, he then decides to report that she's not there.
And then how long is it before it's discovered that in fact she's not missing at all, but she's been the victim of foul play?
She was murdered and her body was found about a week later in not even a shallow grave really. Her body was just there, covered with leaves and palm fronds, and it hit Lismore hard. There was a lot of shock, there was a lot of fear as well. Was there a crazy travelling around looking to do harm? It was a very difficult time for Lismore.
Her then boyfriend Tobias Suckful and his sister were named as persons of interest during an inquest in 2007.
They have been lying from the beginning to the Australian authorities and the German authorities about important facts.
And so then how did you become involved in this story?
They had an inquest into her death, and a lot of things then became apparent. One of which was Toby Suckfel becoming a suspect. And I think, as the coroner put it, there was enough suspicion around him and his sister of some involvement prior to her being found dead that couldn't be explored further because they refused to come to the inquest. They refused to turn up despite requests from police. Another major piece of evidence came out of that inquest, and that was the fourth person on their trip did fly out from Germany and did give evidence. And he said that Toby had worded him up on what he should say, not for the inquest, but generally to police. And of course, that was quite suspicious. Now, he sort of said, look, I don't know why he was telling me these things, but he told me this is what I should say. So we all had our story straight. So that raised a lot of alarm bells, but there were other pieces of evidence as well, such as the fact the couple were fighting. There was a lot of lies told to police around that time as well, over movements, over things heard, said. It was zeroing in on Toby and his sister as having had some involvement, some form of action prior to her being found as a murder victim.
Did you kill Simone Strobel?
No, never. Why should I kill my girlfriend?
What happens next?
I was asked to interview him, and I'm like, well, that's all well and good, but we know he's not in Germany. He hasn't been back to Germany. So I was told to find him, and his last movement was believed to be in South Africa. So I was told, can you go to South Africa and find him? Which is like, okay, you realise South Africa is a whole country. He's not going to be, I need more than that. Have we got any indication whatsoever? And the police had no indication whatsoever. So I flew to South Africa. The chances of me finding somebody in a country, a third country at that, not even a local country where anyone would necessarily know him, were nigh on impossible. And I remember I thought, well, okay, We know he liked the beach, and he was sort of trying out surfing. He wasn't a surfer necessarily, but we know he was trying out. I'll start from Cape Town and move my way up the coast to all the famous beach spots in South Africa. And it was when I hit on the township of Wilderness, and it was almost like that scene in a movie, that happened chance that I saw a poster on a telegraph pole advertising surf lessons, and in the photo was Tobias Sukfeld. And
Wow.
I'm like, no, what are the chances? What are the chances? And I went to, the surf lessons were being run out of a backpacker's lodge. Now, I couldn't go in there as an Australian. I thought that's just going to be a little bit too obvious. An Australian turns up in this quite obscure little town and happens to check into the same hotel. So I decided to become a non-English speaker backpacker. So I went in there and just didn't speak to anybody the whole time I was there, because I wasn't supposed to understand English. And when things were said about me or behind me, or the person at the backpackers lodge was trying to get my attention, I just basically had to ignore them because I just didn't speak English. And that way I could get an idea of what he was doing and just watch him. As he moved about the lodge, he was very comfortable. He was living there free, I think, because he was working the bar, he was running his surf lessons. He was a bit of a man about the lodge, as it were, which was interesting. And I then obviously had to get closer to him, and this is where it got tricky, because I thought, again, I've already got the part. My role is the non-English speaker backpacker, so I needed to find somebody else who could do it. So I got a local actress to assist me to play someone who wanted to do surf lessons. After a couple of days, she said, "So what is it he allegedly did?" And I sort of said, "Well, he's not been accused of anything directly. However, his girlfriend was murdered in mysterious circumstances, and he's refused to give evidence and has been nominated as being a person of suspicion." She was then a little concerned, so I then had to hire somebody else who had to play her boyfriend, who would then join her on these surf lessons, for, if nothing else, just to keep an eye on things. I wasn't expecting any trouble at all, but at some point I would have to approach him and show my hand. A few things came out during that investigation which were very interesting. I spoke to a few people who knew him. Obviously, I could speak as an English-speaking person, not as a backpacker foreigner. They revealed to me that he had built some sort of memorial deep in the national forest to Simone, and they had seen it, and he would often go there and pray and sing. He would take beers and drink around this memorial that he had built to her with her photo and all sorts of other things. I thought, well, that's quite interesting and quite odd. You'd probably do that at a memorial, which there was a memorial built for her in Lismore. You'd think that's where he would do it, not build his own in the middle of nowhere at a national park in South Africa. So that was of interest. The other interesting thing that came out was he was wearing the same necklace that she was wearing in the last photo taken of her, which the police were handing out. Apparently it was either the matching one or it was the same one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that necklace was found with her at the time. And the other thing was he had an alter ego. He had completely changed his backstory. He was telling people he was a soccer star from Germany. He was part of the national football team. He was quite famous, so he'd like to live anonymously and move about anonymously. He also said he grew up in Australia and had been surfing since he was a grommet. You know, he was this little kid surfer. None of that is true. He hadn't been to Australia ever until the time that Simone was found murdered.
At what point did you show your hand?
Look, I would normally be up front and show my hand straight away, but we needed to get an understanding of what he was doing there, what he was thinking. I needed to go around the story, as it were, before we then cut straight to him. Once I'd built up a bit of a profile, I'd spoke to his ex-girlfriend over there who didn't want a bar of him and had discovered certain things and certain facts which disturbed her, which she didn't want to be in a relationship with him anymore. I then decided, okay, I'm going to approach him after his last surf lesson. So I was, again, on the beach, just watching him as they did their surf lessons. And when he came off the sand from that lesson, I just called out his real name, and he turned around and I asked him a couple of questions. I remember very clearly, we were walking up a little beach track. There was nowhere to go, hedges either side. He had his students in front of him. I was just off his shoulder, sort of popping out of one of the side trails that lead back to the lodge, and he couldn't move, and so it was quite an awkward walk for all of us together, walking up the hill as I was questioning him, peppering with questions, saying, "You've been named as a person of interest in Australia. Why won't you give evidence? Why won't you appear at the inquest into the murder of your girlfriend? What are you doing in South Africa? What are you doing trying to get citizenship in another African country?" He was trying to get citizenship in Lesotho. He was applying for visas in South Africa. It was, and all these cover stories, all these different stories and angles. He didn't really want to engage. He was clearly rattled, and as soon as he got to the lodge, his students asked him what was all that about. And again, he came out with the story about being a football star, and the media followed him all over the world because he was so famous. He then jumped in a car and took off. He never returned to that lodge. He moved to another lodge further up the coast, which I followed him to for a while, and again, he just didn't want to engage. One thing, curiously, I thought was he vowed never to go to Australia. He said, "Absolutely, will I never go back to that country again." However, he was already planning to move to Australia, and quite ironically, he did move back to Australia, and I believe is now an Australian citizen.
Do you know where he is now, or what was the last we heard of him?
He's married an Australian girl, changed his name to take her surname, so his surname is now Miranda, lives in Perth. Now, he has been told that he is still a subject of a New South Wales Police inquiry, and in fact there is to be another inquest into how Simone Strobel died.
New South Wales Government are announcing a $1 million reward for information for the arrest and prosecution of people who were associated in the homicide of Simone Strobel. What happened to her really defies all of our values and our beliefs in this country, and we owe it to her family to bring those people to justice who are responsible for her death.